I will have to raise the money to fly both myself and my lawyer to Ottawa. We're asking other organizations to intervene with us, and hopefully a good outcome will happen, because if I don't win, any parent, any Christian teacher is a target.
Gender ideology. It's become almost intertwined with public school education across North America. No longer is your child just learning the ABCs. They might be learning from a fluid curriculum like SOGI 123, where you're told it's about inclusiveness. But then, according to some parents, your child comes home all of a sudden, overnight, confused that maybe they were born in the wrong body. But what if you're a public figure in the education system, an advocate for education, whether that be a teacher or a school board trustee who has concerns about gender ideology that you think parents in the public should know? Well, for Mr. Barry Neufeld, that's meant hit pieces against him in the legacy media, implying that he is not fit to work with children after a career of doing so. It's also meant campaigns to get him kicked off the board.
Considering he's an elected school trustee, this is an issue. This is not acceptable.
Backlash after a Chilliwack school trustee posted a COVID-19 conspiracy and transphobic comments on his Facebook page.
Barry Neufeld, it has come to my attention that you are marketing yourself as a prophet, suppressing SOGI education, and pushing a hateful agenda. God does not support you and wants you to stay away from her children. It is time for you to retire and confess your sins.
And yet he keeps getting voted in because clearly some parents want to hear the message he has to say. And it also meant that he is having to find himself defending his freedom of speech and also his right to do what he does in court. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, and today I'm going to catch up with Mr. Neufeld. You can catch up on my previous reports with him by Googling his name and Rebel News and seeing what we already know today. But today, I want to take you along as we catch up to hear about his upcoming Supreme Court case over this matter, as well as why he still feels that discussing what he feels are the harms for children when it comes to gender ideology is a sword he's willing to fall on.
This is the piano I grew up on. Took lessons on it when I was 5 years old. I was brought up in a Mennonite home, and my grandfather came from Russia. He and his father and his grandfather were all school teachers. And in those days, about 1870, the Russian government had adopted this idea that children were the property of the state, and the state had the obligation to educate them. And my grandparents said, absolutely no way. The first Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald, offered them freedom to raise their children the way they saw fit, and he gave them free land in the Red River Valley just south of Winnipeg. So they came across the ocean to Waterloo, Ontario, bought a bunch of grain and cattle, and took a barge across the Great Lakes, and then wagon train, finally came to Canada. And that's why they came here, was to be able to raise their children with the beliefs that they thought were important. So I borrowed from him.
All right, Barry, we meet again, and you're having some of the same battles, and even more so. You've been a voice letting parents know your concerns about gender ideology in school. Tell some of the people who maybe haven't been following your stories why, as a school trustee, it's so important for you to speak out about this.
Well, my professional career was involved as a probation officer, and I supervised sex offenders and talked to a lot of their victims. When I first heard about this, I thought, this sounds so much like grooming. And other people like James Lindsay, who's an atheist but a caring dad, and John Euler, who's also a sex offender specialist, they also agreed that gender-confused children and mixing them up is setting them up for further abuse and victimization. And I thought I just had to speak out against it.
And speak out you have, not without, some backlash. For the last few times that you've run, there's been efforts to try to get you out, but people keep voting you in. And now you're coming up to another election. When is that happening, and how do you think you're going to do this time?
The election is October the 15th, and we're already getting organized for the election. I'm really tired. I put up with this nonsense for 5 years, but I don't feel that I can back out at this time, because if I lose in the Supreme Court of Canada, if I am unfit to be around children because of what I believe, then that means that principals of Christian schools, teachers in Christian schools, even people who are not necessarily religious but believe in family values, are going to be considered unfit to be around children. They will not be allowed to work with children. They probably will not even be allowed to parent their children. And so I have to win this.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about that case, make sure people know what's going on with it. But if you could break down, maybe summarize a few of the reasons that you think gender ideology is an issue. What does it look like in schools today for parents who don't really understand how it's fitting into a curriculum?
Well, gender ideology has been circulating in our universities for over a generation. It was got traction in the women's studies and gender studies, and now they're trying to put it into K-12 education. Basically, what they're telling children is that gender is on a spectrum. You can be a boy, or you can be a girl, or you can be somewhere in between. And what gender you were assigned at birth might be different from who you really are.
Gender identity is a person's inner experience of who they are in terms of gender, their deep personal sense of being male, female, a blend of both, or neither.
And while many people have a gender identity that's the same as their assigned birth sex of female or male, that's not always the case, because gender exists on a spectrum. Like transgender, which means a person whose gender identity is not consistent with their assigned birth sex. Non-binary, which means a person whose identity doesn't fall in the category of either male or female. And genderqueer or gender fluid, which means a person who does not identify themselves as having a specific gender at all.
Does gender identity have to do with being straight or gay?
Actually, no. Gender identity has to do with the way you feel about yourself, while sexual orientation is based on the way you feel toward others, the people you may or may not be attracted to.
This is very confusing to children, and I have sympathy. There's probably 0.5% of children who I believe are sincerely gender dysphoric. That's a tiny percentage. But suddenly we have an avalanche of new referrals to gender clinics, and these are kids who think they can solve all their problems by identifying as something different.
The day that I finally was told that I could start hormones was definitely one of the most happiest days of my life. And I felt like that is where my whole life began.
If a child comes home and starts using their preferred gender pronouns, a parent should know that that child is already being confused and manipulated into questioning their true identity.
You were born in the wrong body but have the right brain, and you know who you are. We are at Rainbow Camp. It is a camp where anybody is welcome. It's very amazing to be with people that are also transgender.
So how, in your opinion, how would a parent know, and I guess this is probably more fit for maybe a psychologist to answer, but how would a parent know if that is, gender dysphoria or something that you're saying is they're groomed to have now being experiencing through the school system?
Well, as I say, true gender dysphoria is very rare. One of the indicators is that there's a recent phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria. kids in their teens are all of a sudden coming up with this idea. They'd never showed any gender confusion up till then.
The first time I looked at this study, this was after I'd already detransitioned, meaning that I stopped my trans identity. I actually thought that it really resembled everything that the study found, like the high rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm. I found that that really reflected my experience and the experience of so many young people that I'd known both in high school and in college. So I think it's very accurate. And when I look back on myself as a child, I wasn't really a tomboy. I didn't have any gender dysphoria as a child. I looked forward to wearing dresses. I liked getting little makeup kits for Christmas and stuff. So there was no real indication that I would ever grow up to identify as trans or want to become a boy. And it all happened very, very rapidly around the time I was 15.
Well, quite often these are teens who are having struggles in puberty. They're having trouble making friends. And suddenly they realize that if a girl thinks, well, if I come out and say that I'm a boy, suddenly they're going to consider me a hero. And I'm going to be, everybody's going to want to be my friend because I'll be popular because I'm trans. Trans is the new cool thing.
So how do you think that children with gender dysphoria how do you think schools should react or include them in the school system?
I think that schools are overtaking what is the parental right.
It's appropriate at all grade levels to talk about both sexual orientation and gender identity, but just in different ways.
It is in the curriculum for us to talk about family and family diversity, and that's a really natural way to talk about it. And at their age, 6 and 7, they're remarkably open and accepting if that's the tone that is set. So it's actually not as difficult as it seems, I don't think.
One big thing that I've tried to take on this year is to teach a queer novel to my grade 9 class and to not preface it as such. When I was doing it with my students this year, I was just so surprised to see how unfazed they were by it, how this was just, to them, something normal, something that was part of their life quite naturally. When it comes to parents, I have had both successes and challenges.
Parents need to deal with this problem, but what they're doing in the schools is as soon as they suspect there's any kind of confusion about gender, they have a policy where they will not tell parents what's going on at schools. They tell the kid, you're welcome to wear different gender clothes if you come here. And they even have gender closets where a little boy can come to school in his jeans and t-shirt and change into a dress, and the parents would never know a thing about it. This is, I hate to be part of a public system that's allowing that to happen.
I think he's absolutely wrong. He's on the wrong side of history on this issue.
He is longtime Chilliwack school trustee Barry Neufeld, who used a Facebook post to come out against the province's new sexual and gender identity program, writing, quote, "Children are being taught that heterosexual marriage is no longer the norm. And if this represents the values of Canadian society, count me out. I belong in a country like Russia."
Just tell us, why did you put that on Facebook?
No comment. I know.
Neufeld did not want to answer our questions about his post, which has hundreds of comments, many calling him bigoted and transphobic.
The last time we spoke, it was about some of the legal troubles you were having after Mr. Hansman sort of implied that you were a risk to children. Let us know where you are at with things now, legally, and in your current court battles.
Well, it was the president of the BC Teachers Federation that said Barry Neufeld is not fit to be around children. The first result of that was I got 2 complaints in the Human Rights Tribunal that I was creating a dangerous work environment for their workers, for the QP workers, which are the support workers, bus drivers, janitors, secretaries, learning assistants, and the teachers union. Nothing has happened with those in over 4 years. It just seems to be stuck. But anyways, I decided to go on the offensive and I sued Glenn Hansman for defamation. Now, he turned that on its head by using a brand new law that had just been declared in British Columbia, which was called anti-SLAPP legislation. And basically, he argued, because he was such an important public figure, he had the right to insult me in the public interest. and it went to the Supreme Court of British Columbia. After several days of the judge hearing the arguments, he ruled in Mr. Hansman's favor. That was definitely a setback for me, but my faithful lawyer, we took it to the Appeal Court of British Columbia. This time there was 3 judges. They heard all the arguments, and in the end, they said that this was a chilling day for free speech if people could insult a person just because they disagreed with them. So I won in the appeal court. Well, by this time, Mr. Hansman was no longer the president of the BC Teachers Federation, but the union has deep pockets, and so now they are trying to overturn the appeal court decision in the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm surprised that the Supreme Court was even willing to hear my case, because they had made a decision on a case similar to mine, and you would expect that they would rule in my favor. But anyways, it's a major, important issue in Canadian culture and Canadian society, and they thought it was worth hearing. I'm not sure if it's going to be heard in person or online. I imagine by October they will be back to full in-person hearings, which means I will have to raise the money to fly both myself and my lawyer to Ottawa. We're asking other organizations to intervene with us, and hopefully a good outcome will happen, because if I don't win, any parent, any Christian teacher is a target. I consider it a form of religion. The schools are supposed to be entirely secular, but what they've done, they've replaced love of neighbor with diversity, inclusion, and equity. I have never seen such hatred unleashed due to this diversion, inclusion, and equity. One student in one of our schools told me I was such a horrible person, my mother should have aborted me with a coat hanger. Where are they learning all this hatred from? And another thing is, original sin has now been redefined to be anyone who is white and heterosexual, and we must repent of that. It just doesn't make sense. Another reason that makes it sound like a religion is that if you're into the ideology and then realize something's wrong and you want to get out, you get treated like a heretic, and they go after you. In the old days, we used to burn heretics at the stake. Now we roast them on social media.
Cancel culture is definitely going strong. Thank you so much for speaking to Rebel News today, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
All right. I just want to say that in the past, I've been kind of timid about asking for money, but I really need people's help. They can send an e-transfer to trustee Neufeld at gmail.com. I have a Give Send Go page at givesendgo.com/G352V.
All right, and we'll have that linked in the written report.
Thank you.
If you appreciate that at Rebel News, we bring you the other side of the story, even with the legacy media's intention to bury it, then you can help support our independent journalism in a really fun way. You can go to our store. It's called rebelnewsstore.com. There's lots of fun stuff. I've got on a Make Canada Great Again shirt. I got this nice Rebel toque, so you can have a look there, and everything you go there helps our journalism, and just make sure we can keep bringing reports like this to you so that you can stay in the know.